By the end of the semester, what I think my responsibility is to these students is to make them want to be there. Because I talk a lot about college and what college is and my experience in college, just as much as I talk about writing. And by the end of the semester, I think most of them do want to be there. I'd say maybe.
I'm your host, Danny Brassell, and this is the show where we celebrate the positive contributions of individuals throughout our community. And it is my pleasure to have with me today a teacher and an author, Daniel Cano, who's also an alumni of Cal State Dominguez Hills. Thank you so much for coming on the show today, Daniel.
That's right, I am. Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to be here.
Well, let's start in with the alumni thing. What's it mean to you to be an alumni of Cal State Dominguez Hills?
Well, there were so many things I thought about talking about here. And the minute I walked on campus, it's like that's all I wanted to talk about, because I was an alumni here in the 70s and early 80s. And it was a really beautiful campus then. It was small. Somebody kind of equated it with a little Princeton University that nobody knew about. And it was very much like that. It was an older student population in the evening also, so that was perfect for me. And then when I left, I graduated, worked at UCLA, worked at UC Davis, came back and got my master's degree in the early 80s. But what I remember mostly is the teachers, just superb teachers, because when your upper division work and your graduate work, you start looking at who are the teachers teaching you. And I remember just Abe Ravitz and Michael Mahone and Michael Schaefer, so many teachers who just motivated us and inspired us in small classes. So now that I come back and look at it, and I worked here in mid-80s, about 85 to 88, and my job was Associate Director of Admissions, which was to build a campus. We had a dream. Mission accomplished. It's amazing. It's right up there. When I walk on campus, it's right up there with publishing my first book. That's wonderful. That's so beautiful. That's much of is part of me.
What inspired you to come here?
I was an older student. I was married. I had 2 children already. I had thought of going to UCLA because I live on the west side and it's right on the street. But when I went to campus, I've been on campus many times at UCLA. It was, I was older. I was a veteran. So the students at UCLA just seemed to be much younger. I always loved being on UCLA campus, but one of my teachers said, why don't you consider a campus down south? And he told me about Dominguez Hills. So I came down here and I just fell in love with it. And I applied and I thought this was a better fit. And he told me, many faculty members told me, that for an older student it would probably be a better fit because the faculty members also liked older students and worked with older students. And I was a first generation college student.
That's great. And you and I were talking earlier, and because I'm an alumni also, and that was something that we shared in common, was that of all my degrees, that was the one I was the proudest of, because the students that come here are usually older students that are working full time in the day and trying to get their degree at night.
Exactly.
Now, you just passed over it, that you're a veteran, and this is one of the things I love about veterans, is all of them are so humble. But you weren't just any veteran. You were in the 101st Airborne in Vietnam. You won the Purple Heart. Tell us about your experiences in Vietnam.
Well, it was pretty much, what do I do now after high school? I was not a student who ever liked school, which is a bit ironic because now I teach school for a living. I've been doing it for 25 years.
They usually make the best teachers.
That's right. So it was a matter of excitement, adventure. That's my second book was titled Shifting Loyalties, because it really wasn't about patriotism and loyalty. And most of the guys that I knew as veterans too, most of them were drafted in those years. Well, many of them were drafted, but I just wanted adventure. And it goes back to generations also. One of my uncles had been in the 101st Airborne Division, and he jumped on D-Day in France. My father had been in the 82nd Airborne. So I always heard these stories growing up about paratroopers in the Army. And it's really powerful when you're young, when you're a child and you hear those stories, especially males in the machismo of those years, 1950s. You know, we were right after World War II, really. So I just didn't want to go to school anymore. I really didn't know much about college, even though I went to a private school and my parents always wanted me to go. Neither of them had ever been to college at that point. My mom went later on to Santa Monica College to get a degree. So I went into the Army, and but I distinctly went because I wanted to go airborne.
Now, how did those stories from your family mesh with your actual experiences in Vietnam?
You know, we tend to romanticize everything, obviously, and that's what I did. Everything was romanticized. And in some ways, romance is there. You know, the military is seductive. War is very seductive. Because when you're there, and sometimes it's like the adrenaline is so high, it's the only place you want to be. But 80% of the time, you don't want to be there. You start realizing, what did I do? I remember one time I was sitting down in the evening, and we were out in the jungle. I remember putting some rounds into my M16, and I thought to myself, what am I doing? It just struck me, the moment. It was so poignant. It was like this kid of 19 years old taking his bullets to put him, because we had heard that there was an enemy, a squad not too far away. And it just hit me. I'm 18 years old, 19 years old, and I'm putting these bullets into my... But, that feeling is gone because we're trained so well to do what we have to do, that those thoughts don't last too long.
Well, how much of those experiences, I mean, your second book, Shifting Loyalties, is really, it's the Chicano experience in Vietnam. And I was actually curious, because all your books are historical novels.
Yes.
What made you decide to make them novels rather than nonfiction?
I can't write short things. And I can write them, because Shifting Loyalties is like short stories, but I think the shortest may be 10 pages. So everything, I just start writing and I can't stop usually. So, but I always thought about the novel as the form that I wanted to use. It could express more. It's kind of like, the difference between running the 100-yard dash and, cross country. I don't like either running, but when I start going, it's like I have to go this long distance to complete what I want to complete.
Well, and that's something that sets you apart. You actually complete something, because I know everybody always says, "Oh, I have this great book idea," and I'm like, "Well, then write it." You've written 3 novels, which I know puts you in this elite category in Los Angeles, because everybody wants their novel published. You've had 3. What tips would you give to people who are aspiring novelists?
Well, I'll give a tip that I just read earlier today when I was browsing through some books, interviews of writers. And John Steinbeck says most effective writers write about what they love or what they hate. And it struck me. I'm either writing about the hometown that I lived in, because I do anyway, tend to really get close to the communities we were raised. So for me, it was like Santa Monica, West LA. My grandparents came from Mexico in 1915, 1916, and settled in that area. We've been there ever since. So that area to me is home, something I love. So write about something that you really love passionately about. The other side of that is war. And I realized that it was something that I really detested. It was some of the things that I saw. And I didn't see half or even nearly what some of the guys saw, because I was in the artillery. So there were some things I wanted to say about that. And finishing it, so that's the discipline. I read how writers write, and successful writers always talk about the discipline. And I have some discipline because the military gave me discipline, Little League gave me discipline, the Boy Scouts gave me. When you were raised in the 50s, I think we got a lot of discipline. And I'm not sure kids today get that kind of discipline, or teenagers today, because we had so many organizations and institutions and people watching out for us, that we learn to do things certain times and be in certain places. So that's what writing is. To see writing as almost like a carpenter. You get up in the morning, you go to work, certain time. It's the same with us now. And when I wrote my first book, that's what I did. I would start every evening after work at 9 o'clock and write till 11 every single night. Or I'd go to the library and research, because you're right, most of the things I write are history. So I'd be researching and writing at the same time.
Well, and your first book was Pepe Rios. How long did it take you to actually finish Pepe Rios?
You know, it's really hard to say because it was in chunks and pieces. So probably about 7 years in that way. Had I dedicated myself only to doing it 5-6 hours a day, which most professional writers will only write, that's what they do, probably would have taken a couple of years.
Wow. You did something which struck me as amazing also. You found a niche. Not many people find something that nobody else seems to have written about, and you've written about the Chicano experience in Los Angeles, beginning with the mass immigration following the Mexican Revolution in 1910. And you're I mean, I'm looking at it, I'm like, wow, this is. I don't understand why Hollywood producers aren't just jumping on this, because I see a whole series of. I mean, your latest book is basically a sequel to Pepe Rios.
Right, long.
I mean, where do you find? Where do you find all these ideas and these characters?
I think in my own reading, and in my own. I was close to my grandmother, and I was close to my older aunts and uncles, and they were always telling stories. So that's part of it. I grew up around storytellers. And, you know, I asked them still, well, when did you come here? Why did you come here? And why here? And why to this place? And then what about this place? So I go to the library and look, well, who first came to this place? You start finding the dates 1769 are important. And the first parties who came from Spaniards who came here at that time. And then I found out there's people who were still living in the area, who were related to those people. So my mind just starts reeling, and then all of a sudden, because I'm so in love with this place, even though it's changed so much, like you talk about Dominguez Hills, how it's changed. Well, it's the same, you know, our own little towns, and for me, I guess it's a bit, it's different because I still work where I was born and raised. I can see the Santa Monica Hospital from my office. The cemetery, Woodlawn Cemetery, is across the street, and my grandfather's grave is
beginning and the end, right there for you.
Yeah, so that's you know, I think it's a passion. There's a certain passion I have for it.
I feel like we're kindred spirits, because I always tell people if I wasn't doing this, I'd love to run the Chamber of Commerce for Los Angeles, because I just think it's the most vibrant, beautiful place in the world. Now, you were talking about the storytelling tradition in your family, Daniel, and you've been teaching at Santa Monica College English since the late 80s.
Almost 23 years now.
How do you inspire your students to become writers? What do you tell them are the ingredients to becoming a writer?
Well, I do teach creative writing, but I mean, I'm also a realist. Most of our kids aren't going to become writers. Those kids, I call them kids, students. But I teach it as if I were teaching any other subject. If you have a passion for what it is you're teaching, even though they're not going to become writers, at least maybe they can love writing while I am doing it with them. I'm right there in the classroom talking about it. Or when they're bringing me their stories. Or even in composition. You know, students just dislike writing as much as I dislike math, which is one of my, I wish I would have done much more of it, but I try to find out why do they dislike it so much, and often it's you know, it's often the way it's taught, when the writing's taught, and that's what I liked so much about Dominguez Hills, and that's what I took from Dominguez Hills. The teachers who taught writing either researched the writing or they just love talking about writers, and I took that passion with me to the classroom, and it's really that more than anything else. Obviously you have to have the knowledge. Right, so that's where my research comes in and my reading comes in about teaching as well, because you can be a good writer but not be necessarily a good teacher. And I don't like to be bad at anything, mainly because it's too embarrassing.
Yeah,
so.
I love that. Well, what are some of the tricks you do to inspire? And what I like that you were saying is that you're realistic. You're not expecting all of them to be creative writers, but I see that what you do is really show people the importance of writing. And how do you get them that passion for writing? I mean, and just even in their everyday writing.
I think I tell them, and this is one of the first things I say, if you don't think clearly, you can't write clearly. So I often compare writing to their thinking, to them as human beings, to communications, to language, going back to the history of language and how important language is. And you get back to, even going back to people who were ever either slaves or had lived like slave-like conditions. One of the first things that they were discouraged about was communication. They don't want them communicating with each other. Once you begin to communicate and learn what's taking place, especially if you learn to read,
one of the things,
dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the other things I was noticing that you were on the board of New Visions Foundation,
Yeah, right.
and I was hoping that you'd tell us a little bit about your work with New Visions Foundation, what they do.
Do you know anything about New Visions Foundation?
I know a little bit, but I want to make sure the entire audience gets to know about it.
New Visions Foundation is somewhat of an offshoot of New Roads School, which is an offshoot or a cousin or little brother of Crossroads School in Santa Monica, whose founder, Paul Cummins, is an amazing, amazing man. Graduated in Stanford and Berkeley, and came to the West Side and started small private schools. So Crossroads is one of the prominent schools across the nation now. But I think what happens is all schools or everything becomes a little bit institutionalized. So Paul Cummins wanted to start another school, and he wanted to start a school where 50% of the students would be on financial aid, because the private school experience isn't usually open for students from low-income or minority communities. So that's where New Roads came in. And it's been going now for, when did we start New Roads? I was in the original board of New Roads School. I don't know, it's been early 1990s. And then Paul put this board together, and he wanted to do the same thing, but to other schools. So he founded the New Visions Foundation. And just jump quickly is now we are in the Lenox School District, invited us in. The job, what we're supposed to do is, and we do it, not supposed to do, is create this model of schools and teaching in different communities throughout the country, hopefully. So that's how it came about.
Now, is the model always, because I thought it was interesting when you said have half of them at least on financial aid, because I'd be interested in looking at, well, how does that positively affect the kids that aren't on financial aid? Because I think that there would be some reciprocity there.
Yeah, that's where it becomes very special. If you have 50% of the students on financial aid, you're going to have 50% of the students who, I don't like the word diversity because it's been overused so much, but you can have kids with different ideas, different ways of life, different experiences. So the parents who send their children to those schools and pay full pay, they understand that, they know that. So their children are able to blend and to mix, and in the classroom hear completely different experiences that they would never hear otherwise. It goes back to in the early 1900s, late 1800s, the first diversity of the East Coast schools were bring farm kids from Nebraska. There was a big resistance to that because, no, we don't do that at Harvard, we don't do that at Princeton, but they started doing it, and they started realizing how rich it was to start meshing these different groups and people who had different ideas.
And how have you been able to replicate that model in different school districts like Lenox?
Well, the New Visions Foundation is doing the same thing. We started, there was a Camino Nuevo school that
downtown,
in downtown. It was in fact in the LA Times recently. We were asked to come in and do the curriculum for them. So we looked at where they will come to us, and we can go into the schools and see whatever it is they need, kind of like consultants. But sometimes we go to the point where we work closely with the principals and hire the teachers and kind of show them the New Roads model and how it might be different. But also, New Visions Foundation now has created an organization where we're in Camp David Gonzalez. And we started an arts program in Camp David Gonzalez that is a very, very effective program. It's all of a sudden you have these kids who are locked up, and these are kids 14, 15, 16 years old, and they're putting on plays, and they're writing screenplays, and they're painting, and they're drawing, and they always maybe had a knack for it, but in a place like that, no one's ever going to really encourage it. So these kids are putting on exhibitions, they're putting on their plays, and luckily and fortunately for us that the Department of Corrections has allowed us to do this, and we want to expand it to other places. So it's not only schools, but it's school-like
what I like about New Visions Foundation is, I mean, it goes right along with your entire passion. I mean, one of the things you had said earlier is that you were the first generation in your family to get a degree.
Right.
And one of the things I've always admired, why I chose to teach here at Cal State Dominguez Hills, is I love graduation, because it's not like other graduations. It's rowdy. And this is a real achievement, because a lot of these people, they're the first person in their family to get that degree. What's your vision for the future on helping a lot of those students that seem like they don't have that future?
You know, it's a real difficult dilemma, because we have so many kids coming to school now, to college, who probably wouldn't have been coming to college 30 or 40 years ago. When I graduated in 1965 from high school, there were jobs all over the place, and good jobs with benefits and retirement plans and health plans. You could work at General Telephone, or you could work for PG&E. I mean, there were jobs all over the place. So for many of my friends, in fact, most of my friends, in fact, I think maybe 2 of us went to college out of, a whole neighborhood.
Wow.
But they all had good jobs, and many of them are retired now. But today, those jobs are not there. In fact, the jobs that are there are you have to be so highly skilled or trained to get those jobs. So now you have a lot of kids who would be taking those blue-collar jobs who are now in college, right? And many of them are here only because they know that's the only place they can get these jobs, but they may not have a passion for school, right? But that's where I think our jobs as faculty nowadays is important, because we have to show them that passion.
Okay. You see these students every single day. What do you see as the ratio in your classroom of the people that want to be there and the people that are in that class of students that don't have that passion yet, that it's your job to give them that passion? What would you say?
I'd say, I don't know if I'm
don't worry, I'm not going to hold it to you statistically.
Not even that. It's just that by the end of the semester, what I think my responsibility is to these students is to make them want to be there. Because I talk a lot about college and what college is and my experience in college, just as much as I talk about writing. And by the end of the semester, I think most of them do want to be there. I'd say maybe 5% may not. I just don't know what's going to happen when they go to the next class. But I'd say when they first come in, I would just wild guess, I'd say maybe 40%, 50% really want to be there.
Wow.
The other ones, it's not that they don't want to be there, they know they have to be there, so they're trying. And then you always have that maybe small 10, and doesn't seem small, but 10 to 20% who are just there. And they would prefer to be someplace else, but they don't have any choices.
Yeah. Well, and whether you know it or not, you've got enormous street cred. You're an example to the kids that anything can be accomplished, and I think that's a pretty amazing testament every time you walk into a classroom and you see kids that want to be writers. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk a little bit about your latest book, which was Death and the American Dream, which I think I'm right in saying it's a continuation of Pepe Rios.
It is, right.
And I had read one review about it, and they were saying, hey, you can take this on a long time, because you really haven't even taken Pepe Rios to his fruition.
Yeah, he's not dead.
Yeah, exactly.
That's about it.
Very smart.
That's right.
Very smart. Give yourself an out. Can you tell us a little bit about Death and the American Dream? And I also want to make sure that our viewers know about your website, and the website is DanielCanoNovelist.com, right? Daniel, and you were telling me your 15-year-old son was helping you out.
Well, my grandson.
Your grandson.
But my son actually put it together, because he's in his 30s now, but he knows much more about the technical aspects of it, my son. So he helped me a lot. In fact, I have to call him to get things on it.
Well, you can put this interview on there. So tell us a little bit about Death and the American Dream.
Well, you know what, yes, and it was a culmination of, not even a culmination, I mean, it was the next step to Pepe Rios. But I think part of it is sometimes people don't understand history or don't know history. So first and foremost, I want to tell my family story, but fictionalized, and other family stories about those people who came from Mexico in the early 1900s, because immigration today and the whole idea of illegal immigration and legal immigration, there are so many stereotypes and so many things that people don't know. I mean, it's like, why are so many people coming from Mexico all of a sudden? And this has been going on since the 1800s. When I mean this, I mean people coming across that border.
We're a nation of immigrants, and at one point it was people from Ireland like me that were getting it.
And treated the same way. That's exactly right. And that's what I tell my students when we talk about immigration. But in my book, I wanted people to read that and understand that this is not something all of a sudden just started. Even in the West Coast with the Mexican community, I mean, it's people are going to small villages to Mexico, and they're coming from Mexico into Kansas City, Nebraska. I mean, they were working the stockyards back in the late 1800s. So going back and forth has been. It's a ritual, it's tradition, it's almost like a history. So when all of a sudden we said, well, let's close the border, they still came across because we asked them to come across. And then when I started doing the research, I thought our major companies sent people to Mexico in those little villages and gave them contracts to come to the United States. So all of a sudden you close the border, and it's not such an easy thing to do because it comes with mentality. And that's what I wanted to show in my book. I wanted to show how that was. And you have to, but you can't preach in fiction. You can't be the minister. You have to.
And that's what I wanted to tell you. I cheated earlier because I asked, why did you write historical novels? And really what I wanted to say is thank you for writing historical novels, because I think that's what brings history alive to people, is not giving them statistics and numbers, but telling them a personal story. I mean, reading Pepe Rios and then Death in the American Dream, it's like Reign of Gold by Victor Villaseñor. It's telling the lives of people, the great American dream told from the Chicano perspective. And I think that's where it's really rich, and people need to experience this. We're wrapping up on time. What are some words of wisdom you give to other people that are aspiring writers or teachers or future students?
I'm realistic, and I love teaching creative writing because it's so inspiring to see kids who can write really well, to the point where it's like, why aren't you writing? Why aren't you writing? But there's only, out of a class of maybe 25 in a creative writing class, and they tell me this, there may be five who are really seriously want to be writers, and the rest are going into business, sociology, and whatever they're going to go into. But by that point, I do get them to write, and they're good writers. That's the thing about it. And they're good creative writers, and they've never finished a story. So the most beautiful thing is finish something. No matter what it is, finish a piece. And for those who really want to write and be aspiring writers, that's it. Finish a piece. Take it, and if you don't know how to write it, write a letter to somebody as if you're writing a letter. Put dear so-and-so. It's much easier to write that way than to somebody that you're not sure who you're writing to, and then we have all these negative things that come in our mind. They're going to judge us, all these different types of things that will stop us from writing. But there's really no wisdom to it. It's a job. It's work.
It's a job.
Like anything else. Start it and finish it.
And you've done a great job of incorporating your passions with your vocations. Thank you so much for joining me, Daniel. I really appreciate this. Again, you're such a role model to everybody out there, and I'm very excited that you're a Dominguez Hills alumni. We've got all kinds of great gems out there that nobody knows about. There are people making a difference everywhere throughout our community, folks, and you can too. Thank you for joining us, and please join us again next time. Until then, God bless.